Hey internets. So if you were to go back in time to 2015, most people would not be able to guess that in the 2020s, internet content creation would be filled with much of the opposite of the skeptic community's anti-SJW wave that happened back then. Instead, we see tons of breadtube and woketube and woketoid content on the internet these days, with various far leftists trying to one-up each other on their progressive identity politics on who could be more progressive than thou, with tons of Zoomers suddenly falling for the exact opposite rhetoric of what they fell for before. And while part of this can kind of be attributed to shadow banning and deplatforming and whatnot, a lot of it was in fact organic. There are many reasons why this shift happened, but the one I'm going to focus on in this video is some rightoid self-criticism, because as it turns out, a lot of conservatives and sometimes right-leaning libertarians like myself have made some mistakes in the past, some very bad arguments that are easily deconstructed when analyzed by anyone who is well-read, or in some cases can be dismissed entirely on rational grounds. And then these weak positions provide breadtubers with the ammunition they need to easily strawman their opposition, which then allows them to sneak ML theory into discussion and propose it as a solution, where the audience is then fooled into accepting progressive socialist talking points as valid by being provided this false choice between socialism and an easily refuted rightoid cringe. So I'm going to go over what a lot of these bad arguments are, explain why they are bad, so the next time you catch yourself about to engage like this, you hopefully reconsider. And I'm going to start this one out with an argument that is going to be very controversial to some people watching this video, but also very obvious to other people watching this video, which is do not, under any circumstances, use religion as the main core legitimizing focus of your point. Or in other words, never justify what you're trying to say just using religion alone. I'm not saying you can't be religious and you can't have some kind of spiritual beliefs of some sort, just that you can't use it as justification in an argument for policy. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first is that you just sound like a maniac and you're easily dismissed. The person who you're talking to can just simply say, okay, well, prove that your beliefs are true, which you won't be able to do, of course. And then you'll get painted as that crazy person who only believes things because you think that Sky Wizard told you so, which means you've immediately alienated and lost the discussion to everybody who doesn't agree with your religious or spiritual beliefs. That's the obvious reason why you shouldn't do it anyways. But there's actually a secondary, more important reason for why you shouldn't use religious justifications. And this one applies even if you assume that your religious beliefs are 100% correct. We'll just say for the sake of argument that whatever you, the person watching this video right now, whatever you believe to be the one true religion is in fact the one true religion. Guess what? It's still a bad argument, and here's why. Because it's an intellectually lazy appeal to authority. The vast majority of religious values have perfectly rational, philosophical justifications behind them that do not actually rely on your religion being true in order to be true. And so when you say you believe X is true because my God told me so, it's no different than a sociology woketoid saying that they believe X is true because my sociology professor told me so. It shows you haven't actually thought about philosophy beyond the confines of your religion. For example, consider two men. When asked, why do you believe in traditional family values? The first man is not very well read and is only able to give the response, because I believe that it's God's plan for us. While the other man, on the other hand, is well read and is able to give a response that involves Hoppe's time preferences argument, and is able to explain why these family values are more likely to raise better children in a more productive society. He is then able to cite divorce and single parenthood statistics and how they strongly correlate to reduced development and increased mental health difficulties in the raising of the next generation, even when accounting for things like socioeconomic status. And the society that cares about its continuation and future development and economic progress must therefore adopt a culture that privileges these values. Again, even assuming that the first man's religion is true and that he is technically correct, unlike the second man, he clearly doesn't understand what he is talking about. He hasn't actually thought through his beliefs on a higher level of consciousness or gone over the hows and whys behind why these values actually work to create a stable society beyond just because his religious book told him so. It's like if someone came up to you and said something that you don't agree with, so you ask them, okay, why is it that you believe this? And they say, because the great Hiki Jiki Biki Jiki told me so. And then you laugh until you realize that they're not joking. Yeah, and that's pretty much why you don't want to use religion for justifications. Even if you are correct, it's extremely unconvincing, easily defeated, but most importantly shows poor understanding of the subject matter on your part. The next problematic point that we probably all saw a lot of back in 2000 2014 to 2016 is mockery with no intellectual point behind it. This doesn't mean that you can't mock things and make fun of them. We all enjoy a good time of laughing at stupid crap on the internet after all. The problem occurs when it becomes obvious that a person can't actually take things beyond mockery, because then it shows that they don't actually have any real reasons for why they believe what they believe. A perfect example of this kind of low IQ content would be Hunter Avalon. A lot of people say, "Aw, what happened to Hunter? He used to be so good." No. Hunter Avalon was never good. You just found him funnier back then because you agreed more with his politics. But all he's ever done is just mock points that he doesn't understand. Which is funny because he didn't understand them back when he was a rightoid, and he still doesn't understand them now that he's a leftoid. And the easiest way to find proof of this is in some of his videos where he tries to go back and debunk some of his old content. And all it really is just his former self making a mockery of woketoid cringe, and his current self just making fun of his old self. I mean, he had some data-driven arguments, like on gentrification, but they were surface level only, just like his response to them now, later, is also a surface level refutation. Now again, this doesn't mean you can't make fun of dumb stuff on the internet. You just want to also make sure you're backing it up with either a rational explanation or a data-driven based reason for why it is dumb. Otherwise, it again kinda shows that you don't really know what you're talking about. Or in other words, a simple way to put it is that whenever you make a bad faith argument or a mockery of something, just purely for blood sport, for every time that you do that, you want to step back and then give a good faith, serious explanation for why it is wrong on top of it. And this is really a big reason why so much of the anti-SJW content failed eventually, and why so many people were easily swayed by breadtube schlop. Again, sure, some of the algorithm changes had something to do with it, but really there were just too many bad faith arguments made against leftist talking points. A lot of those talking points have some pretty deep academic justifications for them, and you have to take those justifications seriously when you're refuting them. You can't just laugh at them forever. Looking back on things, it's really not surprising at all that Hunter switched sides, because he never understood the side that he was on. Many such cases. So now for number 3, which is giving in to identity politics. I would like you to feast your eyes upon this midwit meme. We have the MAGApedes on the other end saying that the left are the real racists. We have the Newtsy in the middle saying, "No, we are!" And then the Chad Lolbert at the other end saying, "The left are the real racists." Because they are. No, seriously, a TLDR explanation of what I went over on leftist racism a while ago is that the woke brand of leftism at its core is collectivism. And the thing about racism is that racism at its core is also collectivism. They're just applied in slightly different ways, but they ultimately both lead towards collective guilt. And this is why collectivists of any form can never actually give any good, rational explanation against racism, because doing so would ultimately contradict their collectivist beliefs. So in a twist of irony, the only real differences between a true self-identified Newtsy and a socialist is that the Newtsy is simply honest and admits that what they are doing is racist. Beyond that, they actually held on to a lot of leftist positions, and there's actually a video on TikHistory that explains this in autistic detail, if you're interested. And another thing loosely related into giving into identity politics is not understanding that the problem with intersectionality is really just intersectional identity politics, but the actual concept of intersectionality itself is correct. All intersectionality really means is the acknowledgement that different aspects of a person's identity intersect with other aspects of their identity to create unique challenges as a result of said interaction with that intersection. The issue here is that these intersections can be multiplied until you reach the individual, which means that individualism and a more merit-based society is the true logical conclusion of intersectionality when you're honest about it. So when woketoids talk about intersectional identity politics, what they're really doing is creating an intellectually dishonest argument where they're just refusing to push what they are saying to its true logical conclusions. And I see this mistake a lot, where a lot of rightoids don't know how to properly refute intersectional identity politics. And of course, the Newtsies actually give in to these bad lefty takes without realizing what they're doing. Now, next up for number 4 I'd like to talk about is not knowing how to properly engage with what I like to call the neo-appeal to authority. This is a spin on the appeal to authority fallacy that midwits like to push, which is where they try to argue that appeals to authority are actually completely valid arguments. Or in other words, you should trust the experts because there's no way you could possibly know more than them, or know more than a person who studied this subject at great length throughout their entire life, which to some degree has half-truth to it. Sometimes that might be true, sometimes it's just blind credentialism. It's a form of appeal to authority that is kind of an ethos argument, trying to pass itself off as a logos argument. They try to give you a rational reason for why you should accept the authority as valid. And then of course they'll say that anybody who disagrees is just a crazy conspiracy theorist. Or another way to look at it is it's an attempted rational argument against thinking for yourself. Now, the mistake I see people making against this one is that they will fall for the conspiracy theory trap. They'll try to actually argue that, oh yes, all the experts are just politically motivated and know that what they're saying is false. Even if you're correct when you say that, it sounds like an insane argument because, again, you're falling for their conspiracy theorist trap. They want to paint you as a conspiracy theorist. That's what this specific type of appeal to authority is really trying to do. It's actually a veiled personal attack. So the correct approach is to turn it around on them. Demand that they explain the expert position. Put them on the spot. Show that they don't actually know what they're talking about and that they're just exporting their reasoning to somebody else and that they don't actually have grounds to talk about it. An example of someone doing this I've seen before, and I've actually personally dealt with, is someone who tried to argue that racism equals prejudice plus power. And their reasoning was because my sociologist professor told me so. And you can't possibly know more than them about a subject that they've been studying their whole life. And the idea that all these people in the sociology ivory tower are just crazy leftists is just a crazy conspiracy theory. What I did instead was just ask them to give the reason that their sociology professor gave them, at which point they admitted that they don't know. And of course they don't know because, spoiler alert, there is no good reason for why racism equals P plus P. That's just not a thing. It's a collectivist argument. It's easily refuted. And the reason it really does exist so much among social scientists really is because of midwit capture of academia. And so nobody's actually there to point out the stupidity of P plus P. And the proper way to deal with these midwits is really to just point out that they don't really have a right to be discussing something on some kind of mirage of intellectual grounds when they really don't understand it at all. Things are never true because experts say so. Rather, the data that the experts have used is what makes something true. So if a person can't cite that data and explain it, they don't have a right to really be discussing it. Although in all seriousness, you really shouldn't be trying to convince anybody who uses this type of argument because they probably just can't be convinced of anything. With all honesty, you are not going to get through to this specific type of midwit. They cannot be saved. When someone's trying to give themselves rational explanations for why they shouldn't think for themselves, yeah, big lost cause right there. But TLDR, you defeat it by showing that they don't actually understand the ethos argument that they are making. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is specifically something I see other libertarians making a mistake in, and that is not being empathetic to how other people who are not libertarians think. A really good example of this would be the Disney situation, and the question of whether or not Lord DeSantis was in the right to take away Disney's tax-free status, basically as punishment for them being woke. And what I saw was a lot of libertarians saying, oh no, this is evil, DeSantis is a tyrant, he does not have a right to do this, he should not be taxing Disney. And while in many ways this was correct, it was also very tone deaf. Every general conservative that looked at that saw that as libertarians being useful idiots for the left, because they saw it as a company in a position of government-granted privilege by not having to pay taxes is spreading woke propaganda, and thus they conclude that libertarians are being useful idiots allowing that to happen. And then the Lulbert response I saw to that was, well, it doesn't matter if it's fair or not because taxes are still bad. Again, while this is correct, it's tone deaf. It's not understanding where the conservatives are coming from. So here's a better way of going about it. First, acknowledge that the Republicans are technically correct on their understanding of the problem, they're just wrong on the solution. They are correct that Disney is spreading woke propaganda and that this is a problem that should be fixed. But the solution is bad, and here's why. First off, let's say the DeSantis plan of taxing Disney more and taking away their tax status went through, that he successfully managed to pass that through the court. Okay, well, now you've actually set a really bad precedent, because this means that it's now okay for a more left-leaning governor to do the same thing to a company for not being woke enough. If DeSantis' attack on Disney actually did pass through the courts, then what's to stop California from doing the same thing in reverse to Silicon Valley? You see, it sounds like a good idea to tax Disney more as punishment for being woke at first, until you realize that it just sets a legal precedent for giving the government more power that could just easily be used against you later down the line, resulting in a one battle but very lost war. So here's what you do instead. Take a stab at their intellectual property rights. You see, Disney as it exists today is basically a mooch off of their former success. They're just living off of their former glory and abusing their IP in order to make stupid remakes of their previous content, which, by the way, Disney has lobbied the government in order to extend those intellectual property rights because they know that they're piggybacking off of their former success, and so they want to keep up the grift for as long as they possibly can. Even if you weren't to get rid of IP entirely and just return it to what the United States originally had at 14 years, as opposed to what we have now, which is basically as long as lobbyists can keep pushing it to. Just that alone would be a massive blow to these companies which are piggybacking off of former success, and are now just pushing crappy woke remakes. And what's nice about this particular solution is it doesn't just hit Disney, it hits woke media in general. And what I saw was a lot of libertarians understood this alternative solution, but they didn't put any emphasis on it, which made it sound like we weren't acknowledging the fact that Disney is cringe, and that Disney is exploiting their position. Again, the Republicans were correct in their assessment of the problem, they were just wrong on their solution to the problem. And you have to acknowledge when people are correct on things in order to not come across as a maniac when proposing alternative solutions. Anyways, the last no-no I want to talk about here is just focusing too much on issues that don't really matter as much as you think. For example, I see a lot of conservative content creators out there where their entire shtick is to just talk about Mavookseen 24/7. That's just all their content, especially the ones on BitChute. The only thing that really needs to be said about the Vookseen is that the fact that we now know how much of the information around it was misinformation is just all the more reason why the state should not have the power to force people to take injections, especially not with bleeding edge technology that we don't really understand. It's not something that needs to be obsessed about for hours on end, and if anything, doing that detracts from the main arguments against authority having this power. What I see instead is some of the more conspiratorial takes harping on about how the Red Deer event, where all the vaxies will be activated and turn into zombies, will be coming any day now. Well, hey, it's almost 2024, and I'm just going to call it and say that the chances of Vaxie Apocalypse Zombie Day happening are looking pretty darn low. It's pretty low. But more importantly, the problem with people who make these kinds of ridiculous, unproven takes is it gives the authoritarians the ammo they need to attack those of us who take the more rational and proven position that you should not give the government this kind of power, because it lets them pull a guilt by association fallacy by grouping all of these takes together, pretending that they're the same, and then dismissing all of them as anti-science. So now all of a sudden you are anti-science for disagreeing with giving the government to force people to take injections, which is crazy talk. This is, of course, a very, very, very stupid argument, but it is nevertheless effective because some of the loudest voices out there surrounding Vookseen talk are unfortunately also the craziest voices, which makes the normies see these crazy voices, and thus the damage of the association fallacy is done, which is all the more reason why you need to be careful about this kind of thing. You don't want to be that guy who makes himself the easy straw man for leftists to attack as low-hanging fruit. But beyond that, that is all for now, so thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, or tip me on Ko-Fi, or leave a comment for the algorithm and all that stuff. Till next time.